this is our bay window, and this shelf has been a little bit of a challenge over the years. It's painted, it's just simple painted white, and what happens as we put things on it, plants, bookshelves or books, whatever, they tend to stick to the paint, and then when you move the plant or you move the books, the paint comes along with whatever the item was. So my wife had the idea of tiling this, so that's what we're going to try to do. But this is the beginning of the project. This is how the shelf looks before we've done anything to it. So this is the tile that we're using. It's a 1 foot by 1 foot square. It's backed, so it's flexible, but easy to apply. The pattern that we're using is called Country Beige, and it's kind of a terracotta look to it. And then again, once we seal it, apparently the sealer will make it just a tad darker and a little bit shinier. It's got a matte finish right now, but that's the tile. So this is a rough layout of how the tiles are going to be placed. So I have 6 squares, 1 foot by 1 foot, going across, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tiles laid out with a gap at either end, and that gap at either end is even at this point. So what I'm going to do is basically use this final tile, and it will be cut to fill this gap and then the gap at the other end. And if my measurement is correct, it should be about roughly 3.5 inches here, given that I can have a little bit of a gap here and here. So that will take care of that, because this is actually 9 inches long, so there's no problem with that. And I've got a special blade to cut this. Now these tiles, again, what I've done is on this final tile, I have folded one section up, and I'll be cutting this off. So this tile is basically one tile width minus one section that will be cut out. And I've done that because, again, to fit this opening that I have and maintain the spacing between the tiles, I need to cut off that one piece. But what's nice about that is that on my dimensions, I can get a nice even spread of the tiles just by cutting out or cutting off one row of these extra tiles and then spacing evenly between them, and of course regrouting in between that. Our first step in this process is going to be to reprime this painted plywood, because that's basically what this shelf is. And the primer we're using is to waterproof it, because then we're going to be putting tile down. The tile will have a grout and sealer, so there's going to be a lot of moisture during this installation process, so we want something that's not going to just ruin the wood underneath here. So the next step in this process is to go ahead and adhere the tile to the primer. Primer is the paint that we put on yesterday, let it dry. You do have a 24-hour window in which you're supposed to apply the mortar and the tile to that primer, at least according to the instructions. I went to the store and I bought a premix mortar from Lowe's. to make this easier, the tile shop that we bought the tile from had given us a bag, and I would have had to do mixing, and they gave us a 50-pound bag. I clearly don't need 50 pounds of mortar for this little project, so I'm thinking this gallon will be more than enough. So at this point, I'm just applying the mortar using a paint trimmer, I guess, basically a little scraper and flat scraper. And then, as the instructions talk about, you're supposed to ridge the mortar in anticipation of pushing the tile into that. And I'm using a small tool, whatever they call this thing, a trowel, excuse me, notched trowel. You see it's got squares on one end, and then it's got triangles on the other end. My squares are small enough, they're less than 4 by 4 in size, that the recommendation is to use the triangle edges of the trowel. If I was putting bigger tile down, the recommendation would have been to use the square notched side. So that's why I'm using the triangle. And this is what it looks like as I put it down. And I'm glad I got the premix because it goes on very easily, and obviously I didn't have to mix it. So this is the completed shelf after spreading out the mortar. And my next step is going to be putting the tile on, and then a lot of cleanup, obviously. And then once the tile is down and is dried, then we'll be grouting the tile and then sealing the tile. Actually, I take that back. The instructions are to put the tile down, let the adhesive, the mortar, dry, seal the tile, then grout it, and then seal it again. So that's what we'll be doing. So again, this is the tile. It's got a nylon backing, so it's fairly flexible. And again, I'm just placing it gently into the mortar. I'm not trying to necessarily get the final fit yet because I need the right gap between them, and then at the end I need a clean gap, an even gap between that end and this end. So this is the final piece on this end, and I've already cut off one section of the squares, and it was an even section, which is nice. But this is the magical piece, and so I have a little bit of a gap at this end, and I want that gap to be halved, so I have the same gap at this end that I have at the other end. So that's where I'm going to be now putting these into their final placement. I'm just pressing lightly, and what I'm finding is I'll have to go back and clean out some of these squares because they are filling up with the mortar, and I don't want that because I have to put the grout in there. So again, just gently but firmly getting them into place. So that I have an even gap. You can see the gap is a little wider now at this end, so I have to continue to spread these out so that they will fit. And obviously watching so I have even gaps between the tiles that actually match. So my next step, now that I've got the big squares down, is that we have these trim pieces that go up here. And again, I've got two short 3-inch pieces for either end, and I'll probably put those down. And then these long 9-inch pieces are what are going to go in between. So I know, again, roughly this is going to be about halfway. So I'll just set that down. This end, I'll just gently set down like that. Again, I'm not putting these permanently down yet. I'm just placing them. And then I know I've got a couple pieces that are going to come in like this in the mortar. And this magic piece has to fit in here. And then I'll be moving these again to make sure that they're aligned properly. So again, I do the same thing at the other end here. Just lay them down approximately where I know they go. And then this final 3-inch piece tucks right in here. So you can see they're not quite aligned yet, and they're not pushed down into the mortar, but that's approximately what this is going to look like once this shelf is complete. Tiled versus just a wood painted plywood top. So we think this will look a little bit nicer. It'll also be easier to clean. Just a little bit more substantial of a shelf. Now the detail work starts to come in. You can see how in the gaps where I pushed the tile down, some of the mortar has come through, and we don't want it to do that because, again, that's going to be a colored grout. So I'm using a straight edge, and all I'm doing is going through crack by crack and cleaning out the excess mortar so that I have a clean gap between each tile. So this is the completed tile work. It's still got a couple hours to dry with the mortar, but I have gone ahead and cleaned out the little cracks. So we should be able to have a good clean surface for the grout work that will be going in. And that's going to be the next step, but obviously I want to let this mortar dry. So the next step in this process is to seal the tile. The grout, or excuse me, the mortar that adheres the tile to the underlayment is dry and everything is tight. So at this point I'm putting on seal and enhance, and they tell you to test it before you apply it widespread, and I did that. So at this point I'm just putting it on, but you can see it does darken the tile a little bit, and my wife is okay with that, and that's the only thing that matters. So we're going to continue this, but it does change the color and it does darken the tile a little bit. Part of this process is so that when we put the grout in, the grout won't stain the tile, because some of the grout is going to get on top of the tile as we spread it into the cracks, and apparently it would stain the tile. So the seal and enhance apparently prevents that from occurring. But this is the process, and again, just using a small brush to get in between some of the cracks, and it does absorb it. The instructions say to let it sit for 3 to 5 minutes and then wipe off the excess, but candidly it dries faster than that, so we're not even necessarily having to do a whole lot of wiping. I will wipe it off just at the end just to make sure, but it's slowly coming along. So this is the tile after it's been sealed for the first coating. The next step is going to be to put the grout into the cracks, and then it'll get sealed again along with sealing the grout. It dries a little darker. It's hard to tell, but this sample, the 3 pieces on the left have been sealed. The 3 pieces on the right have not. So you can see a little bit of the color difference. But this is what it looks like now that the entire shelf has had 1 coat of sealer. So the final step in this project is going to be to grout the tile that has been put down and given the first coat of sealer. The sealer again for this step was primarily as a protectant against the grout color staining the tile that was put down. Apparently the sealer will stop that from occurring. But now that we're on to the grout section, this is what I'll be using. I'm using what's called Latacrete ready to use grout. So give that a try. It was recommended by the tile store. I also have a grout float, which is soft, kind of a soft rubber, and that pushes the grout into the gaps. We've watched the trusty YouTube videos on how to do this. So the next step is to actually give it a try. So this is the Latacrete opened. It looks like a fairly easy product to apply. We are using mushroom color to go with the tile. You can see it's a fairly close blend. So this is the tile after it's been grouted, and we've let the grout dry. We had wiped off the tile after I'd put on the grout, but we've also wiped down a second time now that the tile is relatively hard to the touch. So at this point we just want to let the tile completely dry, the grout completely dry. And then the last step here will be basically to put 1 more coat of sealer on, and then this project is officially done. So this is the final coat of sealer going on, and Again, the instructions say to let this sit for about 5 to 10 minutes and then brush it off. Or not brush it off, but wipe it off with a soft towel. So this step is just wiping off the excess so you don't get a little bit of a sheen to it. And then we'll let it dry. So this is the finished tile project, completed. It's got the 2 coats of sealant on it, and next thing is to simply put the items back on the shelf that we had originally planned.